Each of us, Joseph Campbell says, is the hero of our own life. And all the hero's journey stories are our story, about our trek from ignorance to wisdom, from incompletion to fulfillment, from illusion to reality, from selfishness to service, from fragmentation to wholeness, from inner conflict to integration. The hero's journey is an archetypal tale that goes all the way down. And so it is in that spirit that we begin our 5-part video series here with part 1 about the hero's journey. And at the core of our work is this essential classic, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So over these 5 videos, we'll take a deep dive into the 3 major components of the cycle and all 17 substages. I want to really take our time and mine as much depth and detail out of this study as we can. This book it's really impossible to calculate the influence this book has had from really enormously significant cultural figures like George Lucas and his Star Wars trilogy. That's a connection well documented. The two of them were friends and worked together quite a bit and influenced each other's work, I would say, and countless other literary examples, all the way down to pop culture, comic books, Dungeons and Dragons, too many video games to name here. So this is his message in a bottle to all of us to help us continue to mine the psychological, philosophical depths of mythology, religion, pop culture, novels, video games, you mention it. So this is really a schematic or a guidebook to so much rich cultural expression around these deep soul issues that the hero's journey is so good at revealing, at laying bare. And what Campbell documents here is not his invention, but rather his discovery of a pattern, the archetype of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell didn't invent archetypes. He learned that from Carl Jung, his friend and mentor. And so what are archetypes again? Archetypes are universal ideas found everywhere across all cultures, across all centuries. Jung argued that they well up from the collective unconscious and take expression in local specific forms. That's why on the surface, a lot of these myths look kind of different in different cultures. But Campbell and Jung before him argue that if you read myth as metaphor and are willing to sit with it and wait, the archetypes always reveal themselves. The supreme being archetype, the sacred mountain archetype, too many to mention. But the archetype of the hero's journey is what Joseph Campbell's specialty is. And this whole book is about that realization that everywhere you look across all cultures, tales are told of heroes. And they're all kind of the same. They leave the known world, go out to an unknown world where none of the old rules apply, and they go through various quests and ordeals, and they face monsters, and they die and are reborn, literally or symbolically, and they eventually, after that long initiation, come back home, the return with its own dangers and challenges. And that cycle is called the hero's journey: departure, initiation, and return. And within those 3 major stages are 17 substages. Sure, not all 17 are in every story, of course. We're talking about a kind of a type here that shows up in many, many different stories in different ways. So who was Joseph Campbell, and how did he get led into this work? Well, it's an interesting story. He was born way back in 1904, and he died in 1987. And he was born in upstate New York and into an Irish Catholic family. He was an altar boy when he was a kid. And when he was 15 years old, his his family home burned to the ground, killing his grandmother. When he was a boy, his father would take him to the Natural History Museum in New York City, where he fell in love with the displays there of Native American masks and canoes and clothing and weapons. And like a lot of young kids in the early 20th century, still kind of close to the end of the age of the Native American. A lot of kids wore buffalo robes on their winter wagon rides, he recounts. So he fell in love with the idea that right here in the U.S., there was submerged beneath the dominant culture this ancient people with their own mythology, their own religion, their own languages, their own cultures. And that really awakened, I think, his love of mythology and history and spirituality. And that became a lifelong passion for him. Now, it's kind of funny, when he started out in college at Dartmouth, he was a math and biology major. That was a passion of his too, but he started taking some humanities classes, and of course he fell in love with all of that. Ended up earning his BA in English literature at Columbia, and then he got his master's degree in medieval literature in 1927 from Columbia. And he was fluent in French and German, threw himself into the study of the great novels of the 20th century, Thomas Mann and James Joyce and others. Spent some time in Europe studying those things. And also in the 20s in Europe, of course, Freud and Jung are still on the scene. They're the hot new thing. And it's in the air. Everybody is re-examining art and literature and culture through the lens of Freudian and then Jungian psychology. I mean, it's inescapable. It bubbles up in his work like it bubbles up in so many ways in the 20th century. So he came back to Columbia and he put a PhD dissertation committee together, and he pitched an idea. He wanted to do his dissertation for his doctorate in medieval literature around the Holy Grail, around Sanskrit, around Freud and Jung, and around mythology. And they're like, hold up here. What are you talking about? We don't do that in lit. We don't talk about Freud and Jung, and we don't do mythology. He was a real pioneer in what we do all the time now in higher education, the synchronous combining of majors, interdisciplinary studies, it's called. Now we do it all the time. Anyway, his dissertation committee wasn't having it. They're like, nuh-uh, you can't do that. So he never did get a PhD. So I just think that's a wonderful window into Joseph Campbell's life. He wrote after that experience, he said, we must be willing to get rid of the life we've planned so that we have the life that is waiting for us. Who has not had their plans adjusted by reality, and they thought they were going to go over here, and now they're going over here. Joseph Campbell's whole life is like that. And it's a fascinating truth that experience of his, which you might initially frame as a disappointment, kicked down a door. And he just carved his own lane, and built this amazing career in speaking and publishing, and became really the preeminent scholar of world mythology. We're not here to worship at the throne of Joseph Campbell or to kiss his feet. He's a creature of his time, like a lot of other white men born in 1904. There are problems in some of the ways that he analyzes things, and we'll get into some of that through the series, of course, but there's no mistaking the fact that Campbell put mythology on the map in a way no one before him had. And there are so many ways in which people in a whole series of disciplines now have to kind of confront his work and in a joyful way recognize the role that ancient mythology played and plays in the construction of religion and really our entire culture, our entire society. Now, after grad school, 1929, right, the Great Depression hit. Everything collapsed. The world kind of came to a screeching halt for a long time. Incalculable human suffering. He didn't have many prospects. He went up to Woodstock, New York, and he found a little shack that he could live in. And he stayed there for 5 years trying to figure out his next move. And the way he wrote about his years in that little cabin up at Woodstock was this. He said, I would divide the day into 4 4-hour periods, of which I would be reading in 3 of those 4 4-hour periods. I would get 9 hours of sheer reading done a day, and this went on for 5 years straight, end quote. So that is a remarkable window into Campbell's postgraduate work. He already had a master's in lit, right? So now he threw himself into Zimmer's classic studies of Hinduism. He fell in love with the Indian traditions particularly, had a chance meeting with the young Krishnamurti on a cross-Atlantic sail to Europe once, and that sparked his interest in Hinduism. And so in 1934, he took a teaching position at Sarah Lawrence College, where he taught literature and mythology for 38 years until his retirement. And during that time, he became Joseph Campbell. He became this wonderful storyteller and great scholar and author of religion and mythology. And 15 years after he started teaching in 1949, he published this book, Hero with 1,000 Faces, his first book. And I almost sometimes feel as I'm rereading it that he maybe thought he wasn't going to write any more books, because man, did he try to pack everything in here. It's like, it's so comprehensive. The first half really has to do with the hero's journey, all the 17 stages. The second half, he kind of goes back through it again, but this time through the lens of, let's look at cosmogonies or creation stories. Let's look at apocalypse stories. Let's look at flood stories. You could teach an entire world mythology class with just this one book. It's not easy reading, but it does open up for you if you're patient and you sit with it. I'll tell you a little secret though. All of his later works are easier to read because they become more conversational. A lot of the books that the Joseph Campbell Foundation is now releasing are transcripts of talks he gave, so they read much more smoothly. This one's slow going with a lot of footnotes, but you and I over these next 5 videos are going to go through the whole study that he gives us of these 17 stages of the hero's journey. And so after this video, the next 4 videos, what we're going to do is we're going to explore all 17 of those substages through 3 lenses. The literal lens, meaning we'll grab each, like the first stage is the departure. And the first substage is the call, or the call to adventure, where our hero is led away from their ordinary life on this extraordinary adventure. And the second of these 17 substages is the refusal of the call. Yeah, because you don't want to go. Harry Potter keeps getting these letters from these owls, but he kind of doesn't want to leave the known world and go into the unknown world. Every hero story starts the same way. And so we'll read that moment literally and just answer a simple question like, what's happening in this phase of the story? The what. But the second lens I want to look at each of these 17 stages through. The second lens I want to look through is the psychological lens, because again, that's such a big piece of Campbell's work, and I think it's a helpful lens to look through. Campbell, like any of us, was a creature of his age. And so he was absolutely smitten, as were all writers and thinkers in the mid-20th century, with Freudian and Jungian psychology. It was just such a dominant way of thinking about this. And reading mythology as the externalization of inner psychological realities. That, as Campbell says, all the hells and all the heavens are within us. All the gods and all the devils are within us. All the angels and all the demons are within us. And what angels and demons and gods and devils are externalized creations, personifications of inner energy centers that are in conflict with each other. This organ wants this organ wants that. So that particular approach to mythology that we sometimes call the psychological theory of myth, that is a dominant way of thinking about myth in Campbell's time. And so we get that pitch quite a bit. I mean, the whole idea of archetypes comes out of Jungian psychology, that in a way, we aren't even really, let's kind of put it in maybe an extreme form. In a way, we aren't even writing myths. They write us. They well up out of us, just like a natural impulse. And then storytellers in our cultures, artists in our cultures, give these soul or psychic impulses names and forms. They tell the stories, but the stories are really always outward manifestations of our own inner struggles, journeys, and dynamics. And that's the sense in which the hero's journey, like any other archetype, are in a sense a blueprint of our own soul, our own psyche. That's certainly how Carl Jung approached it in Jungian psychology. And that's where Jung and Freud broke up, right? Freud was like, all religion is delusion, mythology is just fantasy, not interested. Although he did steal some words from mythology, didn't he? Like Oedipus, the Oedipal complex, and so on. Greek culture finds its way into all of the intellectual life of the 19th and 20th century. It's poetry, and now it's psychology. But Jung had a very favorable view of mythology, and Campbell picks up there. That mythology is, in symbolic form, the language of the psyche. And the most fruitful way to read myth, the psychological theory of myth argues, is to interpret it as an outward manifestation of inner human realities. That's the psychological lens. Now, this approach is both very illuminating, but it's also limiting in its ways, and it has its critics. Just because it's au courant and the hot thing in the mid-20th century doesn't mean that we're stuck with it forever. But let's look at the 17 substages of the hero's journey through the psychological lens and the literal lens. Now, what's the third lens I want to look at these moments through? I'm going to call it the spiritual lens or the philosophical lens. How do the challenges and transformations that these heroes go through, that these protagonists go through, how do they draw out the hero's wisdom? In other words, how do they draw out our wisdom? Campbell talks a lot about the pedagogical function of myth. What can these stories teach us about how I can uncover my courage, about how I can integrate the inner conflict that I find within myself? So that's what myths have to do, Campbell says, is teach us how to live a human life in this crazy place that we find ourselves called the world, with all these other amazing people. Sometimes we cooperate with them, sometimes we're in conflict with them. What can the hero's journey stories teach us about how to better navigate the conflicts, challenges, and triumphs and beauties of our own lives? That's what Campbell's really after in this book. That the hero stories of all the world's cultures are really a manual for not only how to be a human being, but how to rise up out of the mundane and the trapped sense that many of us feel, that we're caught in something we did not design, we did not ask for, and yet our soul is longing for more. Well, the hero's journey is an answer to that longing, because the hero's journey shows us that if you want what your soul is asking for, if you want your own best life, if you want to fully realize all of your potentialities, and in Buddhist terms, awaken into the richness of transcendent consciousness. That's another way to read the hero's journey, not just literally, not just psychologically, but spiritually and philosophically. That Muhammad went on a hero's journey, Jesus went on a hero's journey, Buddha went on a hero's journey. And again, to go back to the first idea of this video, Each of us is the hero of our own lives. And the reason we're drawn to the hero's journey is not just because we love these yarns, we love these stories, the monsters, the fights, the changes, the sacrifices, the ascendancy, the transcendence, the realization. Yeah, we eat that up, but there's something going on inside of us even deeper than mere entertainment and fascination. And that is, we are glimpsing glimmers of the information that I need to transform my life into what it is trying to become. Not to become something I am not, but one thing the hero's journey will do is if I go through the ordeal, it will strip away everything about me that is not me, that is inauthentic, that is just socialized. If I'm willing to face my fears and be undone by the ordeal, by the initiation, by the battles and sacrifices, if I'm willing to face my fears, really face them, and walk off a cliff, not knowing if there is a path there to support me, if I'm willing to sacrifice, the hero's tales tell us again and again and again and again that if you have the heart of a lion and are willing to walk away from all of your visible support systems, you will discover support systems hitherto unseen that are revealed only to those strong enough to walk away from the known and into the unknown. And only then does the authentic you, the fully realized you, the integrated you, the liberated you, the awakened you start to emerge from the murky water of the journey itself. The hero's journey is the journey of self-realization. And so let's think about our journey through this book. Joseph Campbell's essential book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Let's think about our journey through this book over these 5 videos as a kind of hero's journey, as a kind of ordeal. I'm going to ask you to read the book along with me. And that's going to be a rich opportunity for you and I to study this essential text together. Let's wring every drop out of it, literally, psychologically, and spiritually, and see what it has to offer. See what it has to teach. See what the world's wisdom traditions, through their heroes' journeys, have to teach. As we leave the known world and let go of our visible support systems, Campbell will guide us through this voyage of ultimately self-discovery. So next time in video 2, we'll begin with the departure in that first stage, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, the supernatural aid, and off we go. So I am so looking forward to this study with you. Thanks for joining up and taking this trip with me. The ironic part is the whole purpose of the journey is not to go out there, but to go in here and to come home to our own lives. Just like Dorothy does in The Wizard of Oz. She goes on quite a journey with the tornado and Oz and all of that. And of course she comes right back home. And of course all the characters that she met on the journey are characters that she already knew in her ordinary life. But she could not know them truly, fully. And she could not know her own strengths and wisdom fully until she had gone through that difficult, arduous journey. We're going to be talking about a lot of books, a lot of movies. I encourage you to find your own examples of all these moments that we're going to study. Really looking forward to this. Thanks for joining me on this journey of the first and the next 4 videos of The Hero's Journey. See you next time.